19 February 1945. Iwo Jima Mount Suribachi stands over a narrow wedge of volcanic rock in the North Pacific, its slopes cut by vents and ash gullies. Before dawn, transports roll in the swell, while the United States Fifth Fleet lowers wave after wave of landing craft. 3 Marine divisions are assigned a simple sentence with brutal terms: seize the island, secure the airfields, and cut a gap in the early warning chain that shields the home islands. The map looks small. The ground is not. Under the black sand lies a fortress built to survive. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi has refused beachline bonsai attacks and instead ordered a defense in depth. Pillboxes are sunk into the rock. Gunsight apertures are no wider than a helmet rim, and miles of tunnels bind positions into a single organism. Naval bombardment has hammered every visible point for days, yet the mountain answers with machine gun threads and mortars the moment the beaches crowd with men. The first question is immediate and technical. How do you neutralize a position that is not exposed to shot or shell? Portable flamethrowers can scorch a mouth if a man can reach it, but the cost in yards is measured in operators lost. Demolition can collapse a roof if sappers can get a charge to the seam. Both require exposure in a killing zone crossed by interlocked fields of fire. The assault brings a new instrument meant to change that arithmetic. Sherman medium tanks have been rebuilt in theater with a turret projector that throws burning fuel deep into apertures and vent lines. If fire can be carried under armor to where defenders breathe, then the tunnels that make the island strong may also make it vulnerable. This is the stake on day one, not just whether Iwo Jima falls, but whether flame delivered from armor can open a path through stone. The road to Iwo Jima begins in the summer of 1944, when the United States captures the Marianas and opens long-range bombing of the home islands, from fields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam Boeing. B-29 bombers fly a route that passes close to the volcano islands. Iwo Jima sits beneath that route with airfields that can launch fighters against the bomber stream, and with ground stations that can warn Tokyo hours before strikes arrive. American planners decide that the island must be taken. The purpose is practical. It will deny a forward radar and fighter base to Japan, and it will give damaged bombers a place to land on the return leg. In Tokyo, the Imperial General Headquarters can spare no fleet to contest the sea approach. The garrison must hold with what it has. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi studies Tarawa Saipan and Peleliu and draws a different lesson from earlier defeats. Beach counterattacks waste men against naval gunfire. A defense hidden in rock can trade space for time. He orders a fortress to be built under the ash. Artillery is dug into concrete casemates. Pillboxes are sunk into slopes with only narrow gun slots exposed. Tunnels and galleries link positions so that a unit can fall back unseen and reappear behind a new seam of stone. He instructs his officers to conserve lives and fire until the beaches are crowded and the enemy is inland where naval guns cannot see. American forces also study the Central Pacific battles and come to a blunt conclusion. Against buried concrete and lava caves, rifle fire and high explosive are not enough. Fire must be carried into the openings and held there. Portable flamethrowers have done that on many islands, but their short range demands courage at a few paces, and losses are heavy among trained operators. The answer is to put a projector behind armor and to carry enough fuel for repeated long burns. In Hawaii, during late 1944, a joint team from the United States Army Chemical Warfare Section and United States Naval Construction Battalions builds a solution on an existing chassis. They take a Sherman medium tank and replace the bow machine gun with a large capacity flame system, then refine the arrangement so that the projector can traverse from the turret face. The group solves 3 problems in sequence. First, range must exceed that of a man-carried set. Second, the stream must be steady and reignite reliably after pauses. Third, the vehicle must protect its most vulnerable plumbing from small arms and fragments. Through repeated trials on Oahu, the team arrives at a theater standard that crews can maintain in the field. The mixture is a thickened gasoline carried in internal tanks. Pressurization and ignition are controlled from the turret. In training burns, the projector can send fire toward 100 meters under good conditions, far beyond the reach of a soldier on foot. Marine tank battalions reorganize to integrate these vehicles as scarce assets. Engineers rehearse with the tanks so that lanes are cut, mines lifted, and approach ramps pushed by dozer blades before a projector ever opens. Rifle platoons are briefed to guard the flanks and rear of the tanks at very close distance because a single sapper with a mine can kill a track. Demolition sections prepare satchel charges to follow a burn and seal a tunnel once the garrison is driven back by heat and smoke. Supply officers plan forward refuel points with cover from observation. Hose lines, spare nozzles, and thickener drums are staged where they can be reached without exposing crews for long. On the Japanese side, countermeasures are planned as well. Mines are laid on likely tank routes. Cave mouths are built with dog legs to defeat straight-line fire. Ventilation shafts are dispersed and disguised so that a single burst cannot kill an entire system. The expectation is that the attackers will exhaust themselves on the first belt of positions and then stall in the second. Kuribayashi writes that every day of delay is a success because every day brings the war closer to the home islands on worse terms for Japan. By January 1945, the fleets assemble. Admiral Raymond Spruance commands the covering force. Admiral Richmond Turner commands the amphibious force. The 5th Amphibious Corps will land 3 Marine divisions on narrow beaches at the southeastern foot of Mount Suribachi and then drive north along the island's spine. The assault plan places portable flamethrowers and demolition men in every rifle company and sets the armored flamethrower tanks to be pooled and dispatched where the cave belts are thickest. The aim is not drama. It is arithmetic. If fire can be delivered repeatedly at standoff distance, and if engineers can follow immediately with charges, then each strongpoint becomes a task measured in minutes instead of hours. The stage is set for a methodical contest between a fortress of stone and an instrument built to pour heat into stone. 19 February 1945. The first assault waves push into the surf and find that the black strand is not firm ground, but ground pumice that swallows ankles and burying anchors. Mount Suribachi looms at the left of the landing front like a cold furnace. The beaches coated red, green, yellow, and blue are narrow strips pinched between surf and low terraces of ash. Naval gunfire has stopped for the approach. The moment the first tractors and amphibious tractors bump high on the sand, machine guns and mortars open from cut slots and cave mouths that survived days of bombardment. Company runners wave men off obvious lanes, and the beach begins to layer with stalled vehicles, wounded, and piles of gear. The first hours are a fight to clear a corridor off the waterline wide enough to bring in tanks and engineers. Rifle battalions move by small rushes toward the first terrace. Portable flamethrower teams work in pairs behind a screen of rifle fire to close on single apertures and burn them long enough for demolition men to place a charge. It is deliberate and vicious work at short range. On some fronts near Mount Suribachi, portable operators do not live to finish a second tank of fuel. The lesson is immediate. Against interlocking caves, heat must be delivered while men stay alive in the open. Sherman medium tanks begin to land by midday and nose forward through ash that behaves like snowdrifts. Some are fitted with dozer blades to push a lane collapse, low revetments, and shove wrecks aside to open space for follow-on waves. Tank battalion commanders hold the new flamethrower conversions under close control, at first waiting for infantry commanders to identify clusters of cave mouths that have stopped a line. Through the afternoon and into evening, radio traffic standardizes a few phrases. Mark the vent. Hold the grenades. Wait for flame. The new tanks are not yet everywhere, but their promised effect is already being written into company orders. On the right of the line, where the ground rises, toward Airfield No. 1, assault companies reach the runway edge by last light. They discover that the ground beyond the strip is raked from unseen positions that lie not ahead, but off to the flanks and to the rear, through tunnels. Men learn to watch the air for signs of an opening. Smoke drifts sideways from vents cut into rock. Muzzle flash comes from the same black slit that an hour earlier showed nothing at all. The battle reveals itself as three-dimensional. The map is not only a surface, it is a roof over rooms. 20 February. The push continues with short advances and sudden stalls. Infantry leaders pair each portable flamethrower with a demolition team and a rifle squad and rotate them to limit exposure. Engineers cut lanes through mined ground with bayonets and probes because detectors balk in the mineral earth. Tank dozers carve bays at the terrace edges where troops can assemble out of direct fire. The first scheduled calls for armored flame are logged. Scouts drag signal panels and hang them at the lip of rock formations to mark vents. Machine gunners are told to hold fire until the tanks are close to avoid drawing concentrated mortar on the approach lanes. 21 February. Flame tanks move to the front in pairs with a third held close behind for relief or rescue. A method settles in. Riflemen walk at the skirts of the tanks and kill anything that moves within a few paces. An engineer team stays with each tank to cut wire pick mines and guide the dozer blade when a berm must be thrown down against a mouth. The tank crew opens with a short tester to check pressure and ignition, then lays on a long burn angled so that fuel splashes inside the slit and runs backward along rock to find the interior. The pause that follows is as dangerous as the approach. If a sapper darts out with a mine or a satchel charge, the only answer is a rifle at 5 to 15 meters. Where the guard line is tight, the rush fails. Where it is loose, a track is blown or a return roller broken, and the tank becomes a dead hulk under fire. Crews learn quickly to keep the glacis toward threat and to traverse the projector without slewing the hull. Around Mount Suribachi, the effect is visible by the second evening. Positions that shrugged off high explosive begin to fail when liquid fire pours into seams. Some garrisons try to wait out the burn behind dogleg walls. Smoke pushes back through ventilation, and men run for air. Others attempt to break out through rear galleries and run headlong into rifles that were posted for exactly that. By 23 February, the net of caves on the south end unravels and patrols reach the summit of Suribachi. The flag raising that follows marks the southern turning of the field, but the northern two-thirds of the island remains a dense knot of positions that will require a different scale of fire. In the central sector, units fight around airfield number 2 and into broken ground cut by ravines. This is terrain built for the defender. Every gully hides a lattice of interlocking mouths and vents. A single cave can hold up a company for hours. Battalion operations maps begin to carry a new symbol to mark flame support pending. That symbol governs the day. A rifle line that has stalled waits under cover, while liaison scouts move to the tank pool and walk a flame section forward under smoke. Where a flame tank arrives, the line jumps 200 or 300 meters in an hour. Where it does not, the same ground costs a dozen men to gain a handful of yards. Refueling becomes a phase line of its own. Flame fuel trucks are parked under ground cover behind a fold in the terrain. Hose lines are run forward to short refuel points, screened from direct observation by the dozer tanks. Crews measure their day in cycles of burn transit, refill burn. Supply officers begin to route thickener drums and spares by tracked trailers to keep the cycle ahead of demand. Unarmored portable operators adapt as well. When a flame tank burns a mouth, a portable team follows with a short blast into a higher vent or a side slit that the tank stream could not reach. Then, a demolition team hurls a charge to close the chamber. On the left, near the old quarry and the coastal bluffs, the same pattern repeats at a smaller scale. Patrols learn to read the rock not just for obvious apertures, but for the faint streaks of soot that mark a breathing hole. A burst of flame into a vent that looks the size of a fist can empty a chamber that fought all morning from a gun slot no wider than a hand. The geometry of reduction becomes a drill that pairs reconnaissance with fire, then follows with blast and shovel. By the end of the first week, the opening moves have clarified the character of the battle for every level of command. The enemy will not die in the open. He will be forced out by heat and smoke or sealed inside by charges. Portable flamethrowers remain essential, but are too costly to use alone against belts of caves. The armored projectors concentrate the one thing that changes the calculus at acceptable risk. Orders reflect that truth. Regiments schedule their days around the availability of flame tanks and engineers, not around arbitrary hour marks. Maps carry creeping clusters of burned positions marked in grease pencil. The island still breathes fire from the north, but for the first time there is a consistent method that turns ground gained into ground kept. The turning of the battle does not arrive as a single charge or a dramatic breach. It arrives as a schedule. Regimental orders begin to read like engineering. Work plans concentrate armored flamethrower tanks on the main effort. Attach engineer platoons with dozer tanks to each assault company. Advance by bounds, cave to cave. Do not expose riflemen where heat and demolition can do the work. The language is calm because it must be. Every mistake on this ground costs lives measured in squads. In the central sector north of Airfield Number 2, the first bound of the day begins at civil dawn. 2 armored flamethrower tanks move up with a third in trace. Dozer tanks precede them to shove down berms and throw dirt against low lips that could mask a blast. A rifle platoon walks tight to each flank with a second platoon following 5 to 10 paces back to kill sappers who might slip through the first ring. Engineers probe with bayonets for mines and mark dead ground with strips of cloth. When the approach lane is ready, the tanks halt just under the unknown mouths. The crew chief calls for a tester. A short burst touches the rock to confirm pressure and ignition. Then the projector lays on a sustained stream angled high and a little off-center so the fuel splashes inside and runs backward along the tunnel wall. The effect underground is recorded in captured notes and in the statements of prisoners who survived their first burn. The heat by itself is not always decisive against chambers with dogleg walls. The smoke is. It rolls backward through the ventilation and turns air into poison. Men claw at doors that will not open fast enough. Others burst out of secondary exits into rifle fire. The tactic that seems crude from a distance is precise at 10 meters. It is about angles, standoff, and timing. If the burn is too short, a garrison can hold. If the angle is wrong, fuel sheets off harmlessly. If the infantry ring is loose, a single runner with a mine ruins a track and freezes the advance under mortar fire. Where the sequence is executed cleanly, the position dies in minutes. By late February, this drill is repeated dozens of times a day, and the map begins to show it. Company logs list strongpoints by a number and a nickname. Each entry closes with 3 letters that have begun to govern the tempo of the island FDS fire demolition seal. Fire drives the garrison back from the mouth. Demolition collapses the first chamber or chokes the corridor. Seal means enter if safe police and backfill dirt until no vent breathes. The method denies defenders the ability to reoccupy at night through a rear gallery, which had been a pattern in the first 2 days. It also conserves rifle ammunition and lives by converting open firefights into timed reductions. The decisive run of days arrives as the assault turns north into the belt of ravines that guard the approaches to the last airfield and the ridges beyond it. Here, the ground itself has been engineered to lengthen the fight. Each ravine carries multiple interlocking cave groups with alternate exits that look like natural cracks. Direct fire weapons cannot sweep these angles. The only tools that can cross that geometry are flame and blast under armor applied again and again. Regiments respond by pooling armored flamethrower tanks at the corps level each morning and issuing them in packets to the main effort battalions. That pooling is not centralization for its own sake. It is a way to guarantee that the weight of fire is applied where the day's map says it matters, and that the tanks can be refueled, repaired, and returned in a cycle measured in hours. Refuel itself becomes a battle drill. Fuel trucks remain under cover in a draw. Flexible hose is laid forward to short refuel points screened by the dozer tanks. Crews crack hatches as little as possible to limit the risk from snipers. The gunner keeps the turret trained toward known threat arcs, while the loader manages the ignition gear. In some sectors, to reach vents high on a cliff face, crews couple portable flame guns to the tank fuel system through a reducer so that an infantry operator can climb a few meters and send a short pulse into an angle the projector cannot reach. The pairing of portable and armored systems solves many small problems that neither can solve alone. Japanese countermeasures adapt in parallel. Mines are sown in depth along likely tank alleys. Sappers train to rush in the 2 or 3 heartbeats that follow a long burn when the projector pauses and the turret crew checks gauges. Some caves gain a second dogleg wall to break the reach of the stream and to slow smoke blowback. Commanders install more vent caps disguised as stone to distribute airflow. Riflemen at the mouths carry grenades set to short delays to bounce into the projector cup. A few of these counters work for a time. None change the calculus where infantry rings are tight and engineer drills are rehearsed. Losses among armored flamethrower tanks mount anyway. A mine that tears a track pin or explodes a return roller can halt a vehicle in the kill zone. A fragment that pierces an external line can disable a projector even when the hull remains sound. Crews learn to carry spare lines and to improvise wraps with sandbags and concrete around known weak spots. Commanders establish immediate rescue procedures. If a tank is immobilized but not yet burning a second tank, dismounts smoke pots, pushes alongside, and tows it out by a short chain, with the assisting crew firing the projector to suppress the cave mouths that observe the lane. The procedure is dangerous, but it denies the defender the propaganda and morale effect of a burning hulk on the line. The broader decision comes not from individual heroics, but from repetition at scale. When armored flame is present, an assault company reports progress in hundreds of meters by end of day. When it is absent, the same company measures progress in tens of meters, with casualties out of proportion to ground gained. Staff officers take the hint. Daily field orders begin to schedule not a fixed line of departure for everyone, but a prioritization of flame and engineers toward one regimental axis at a time, then another in a sequence that turns the northern belts from a continuous front into a series of isolated knots. Once a knot is isolated, the same sequence plays out again with fewer flanking fires to worry about. The human dimension inside the American formations shifts in a subtle way. Riflemen who have spent hours pinned by an unseen gun become willing to rise and move when they know a flame tank has been assigned to their sector. Portable operators who had expected to attack alone now work as close support to armor rather than as independent spearheads. Engineers who were once summoned as problem solvers at the end of a failed assault now start the assault by shaping the lane. The presence of armored flame changes behavior because it changes survival odds. That change multiplied across dozens of companies is the real turning of the battle. By the first week of March, the northern network begins to fracture. Airfield number 3 is turned from its flank. High ground beyond it that had been coded as multi-day objectives on staff maps fall in hours once a flame section is assigned and lanes are cut in advance. Captured notes describe shock among defenders in sectors first touched by the armored projector. Deep galleries that endured days of bombardment become untenable in minutes from smoke and lack of air. Some garrisons attempt night counterattacks to reach the fueling points. These are met by pre-planned fires because the tank refuel timetable has become as predictable as the tides. Commanders expect raids on the cycle and stack machine guns where they will come. What makes this phase decisive is not that the defenders finally run out of courage. It is that the method denies them the one resource they cannot replace on a volcanic island-safe interior space. Every sealed chamber is a loss that cannot be repaired. Every vent that no longer breathes shrinks the oxygen map of the garrison. The last positions still fight hard, and patrols still take fire from slits that look like shadows. But the battle's center of gravity has shifted. The main questions each morning are no longer whether the line can move, but how many tanks can be kept fueled and how many engineer hours can be assigned to each reduction. When those answers are favorable, ground falls. When they are not, ground holds until the cycle resets. In that steady arithmetic, the island is decided. 26 March 1945. Organized resistance on Iwo Jima ends. The reports that closed the operation read like inventories of damage and of new utility. The island is a scar of black ash, collapsed galleries, and sealed vents. The runways that caused the battle become the reason the battle matters beyond its beaches. Within days, construction battalions and aviation engineers repair surfaces torn by shell holes and trench lines. Fuel lines, radio beacons, and crash trucks appear beside the strips. For the United States, Iwo Jima shifts from an objective to a node. Damaged bombers returning from the home islands begin to arrive in ones and twos, then in steady streams. Some land on one engine. Others come in with gear-locked flaps unresponsive, and crews counting the last minutes of fuel. Medical tents and aircraft maintenance crews form a chain from runway edge to the waterline. The island that consumed lives to take now returns lives through service. For Japan, the immediate effect is the loss of a forward radar and fighter base on the bomber route, and the removal of a warning post that had bought hours of preparation time for cities and airfields. The loss also signals that the tunnel-centric defense in depth can delay but not prevent an amphibious assault that is paired with methodical engineering. In the statements of prisoners and in intercepted messages, officers note the shock of armored flame as a new factor that no garrison on rock had yet faced at scale. The tone is not theatrical. It is professional. A defensive system designed to absorb artillery and small arms fire did that. It did not absorb heat and smoke pushed deep into its lungs. Within the American force, the operation triggers a rapid consolidation of lessons. Corps and division summaries elevate a set of practices from field improvisation to doctrine in a matter of days. The first conclusion is that flame demolition and armor must be scheduled together, not requested piecemeal when a unit stalls. The second conclusion is that engineer time is a decisive resource. Lanes, ramps, and covered refuel points built ahead of the assault save riflemen in front of the assault. The third conclusion concerns logistics. The flame system is only as useful as its fuel thickener and spare parts. Staff officers who had thought in terms of artillery shell allotments begin to carry tables for gallons of flame fuel per day and for the location of hose and nozzle kits by battalion. Tank battalions submit their own lists. They emphasize the need for dozer blades on a proportion of gun tanks to shape approach lanes and rescue immobilized projectors. They recommend extra protection around low hull plates and return rollers to defeat satchel charges that are thrown from short range. They ask for standardized signals that rifle and engineer teams can use under smoke and under the noise of a long burn. Many of these notes are minor in appearance. Each note removes a failure mode that had cost lives under fire. Infantry regiments draw a more human lesson that is present in their daily logs. When armored flame is assigned to a sector, riflemen become willing to move against cave belts that had stopped them the day before. Morale responds to survivability. Commanders note this change without sentiment because it helps them plan. They pool flame tanks at dawn, allocate them to the weight of effort, and accept that a company without armored flame support on a given day may not pass a certain line of rocks. The schedule that had decided the turning point of the battle now decides the rate at which the island is finished. The cost of the method remains visible at the same time. The flame tanks that survived carry scars across their bows. Tracks show new links and new pins where repairs were made in the field. Some vehicles never return and leave square burns on the map where salvage crews did their work at night. Portable flamethrower teams, though no longer the point of every assault, still pay heavily whenever the ground forces them forward without armored cover. These facts enter the after-action summaries as plain statements. They shape the tables that plan the next operation. Beyond the beach and the rifle company, the consequences extend into the air war. As the runways stabilize Bomber Command, records a growing count of emergency landings. The numbers rise week by week. Exact tallies vary across contemporary reports, but the pattern is clear. The island becomes a safety valve for heavy aircraft that would otherwise have ditched at sea or failed before reaching the Marianas. Search and rescue units base closer to the bomber track. Fighter escort ranges change by small but significant margins when maintenance crews can turn sorties on the island between missions. These are operational details. Each detail compresses time, reduces loss, and slightly increases pressure on the home island's defenses. There is also a consequence in the public sphere that sits beside the technical effects. Photographs of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi circulate through the fleet and then through the United States. The image becomes a symbol of endurance and sacrifice that the home front reads as a promise of eventual victory. Bonds are sold, and names of places that few people had heard a year earlier become common in street conversations. The episode itself does not trade on sentiment. The crews on the island are too busy to look backward. Yet the broader war effort does not separate morale from logistics. A nation that believes the war can be finished supplies the tools that finish it. On the Japanese side, the consequences are inward-facing. The garrison dies almost to the last organized unit. The loss of officers and specialists trained in underground fortification cannot be replaced in the months that remain. The record of the defense, however, influences the last major land battle that follows. On Okinawa, the Imperial Army and Navy adopt similar depth and concealment. The American landing force carries forward the method that Iwo Jima proved. Armored flamethrower tanks are scheduled from the first week. Engineer assets are concentrated early. Refuel cycles for flame fuel are built into the daily scheme of maneuver. The same contest between rock and heat begins from the opening days. The precedent is direct and acknowledged in staff notes. The institutional consequences continue into the manuals and equipment lists that appear after the war. The theater-borne designation for the Sherman-based flamethrower becomes a line in formal histories and then a case study in training texts. The engineering truths that the battle forced into view also outlast the vehicles themselves. Assault against subterranean positions demands three linked elements: reconnaissance to find the breadths of a system heat, to force garrisons to move, and demolition to close what cannot be cleared. These statements are not slogans. They are checklists that will appear with variations whenever armies face opponents who live underground. There are debates that the immediate aftermath cannot resolve. Analysts will differ on how to count positions killed primarily by flame versus those that fell to combined small arms and demolition. Records of gallons expended per day by each armored flamethrower section vary across logs. Loss figures always invite revision because much of the dying occurred in chambers that collapsed, and because patrols found bodies days later or not at all. The summaries that close the operation therefore speak in ranges and in cautious phrases when they try to quantify exact effects. Yet across those same documents, two qualitative points hold without serious challenge. First, defense in depth under rock prolonged the fight and raised the price. Second, armored flame paired with engineers compressed that fight and lowered that price relative to any alternative available at the time. A final consequence exists at the level of method. Iwo Jima demonstrates that the center of gravity in a reduction fight is not a hill or a single bunker. It is a cycle. Fuel, spare parts, hoses, dozer hours, and engineer hands move the line forward as surely as courage does. Commanders who treat that cycle as the main effort take ground. Commanders who treat it as an adjunct pay more for each yard. In the weeks after seizure, as the island's role shifts to rescue, and staging staff officers carry that lesson into the next operation plan. The documents they write are dry. They discuss gallons, hours, and routes in the language of maintenance and delivery. The men who will live by those documents understand the point. Against an enemy who fights from stone, victory is an engineering outcome executed under fire. By early April 1945, transports lift fresh units off the repaired piers of Iwo Jima and out across the same ocean that brought the assault force in. The beaches are quiet except for construction and the drone of aircraft. The sealed vents remain as black scars along the ridges, each a marker of a position that once fired and now does not breathe. The island has moved from battle to function. Its consequences, military, logistical, and symbolic, run outward along bomber routes into planning rooms and across a home front that reads its name on posters and in headlines. The arithmetic that decided it remains available for any commander who will gather fire steel and shovels in the right order and sustain them to the end. In the long view of the Pacific War, Iwo Jima stands as the full maturation of two opposing ideas. The defender proved that a tunnel-centric defense in depth could survive days of bombardment and force an attacker into short-range reduction fights. The attacker proved that heat plus demolition, delivered from behind armor, could turn those fights into a repeatable method. Most official syntheses and later histories converge on three conclusions. First, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi's design extended the battle and raised the cost by transforming ground into a layered machine of fire and concealment. Second, armored flamethrower tanks built and refined in theater by chemical warfare specialists and naval construction battalions provided the only reliable way to evict garrisons from hardened voids without spending infantry lives by the hundred at the cave mouth. Third, engineering discipline, rather than dramatic charges, decided the calendar. Schedules for fuel hose lines, dozer work, and demolition set the pace of victory. Debates remain, and likely will remain. Exact counts of positions reduced primarily by flame versus by combined small arms, and charges vary by unit diary. Daily totals for gallons of thickened fuel expended differ across logs. Estimates for enemy dead underground can only be ranges because many chambers collapsed or were sealed. These uncertainties do not change the operational judgment that commanders on the island wrote in plain language at the time. When armored flame was present, the line advanced in hundreds of meters. When it was absent, the same ground cost more men and more hours. The inheritance of Iwo Jima was immediate. On Okinawa, the American landing force scheduled armored flamethrower tanks from the start, concentrated engineers early, and treated refuel cycles as a primary planning factor. Post-war manuals captured the template in unvarnished steps that echo the island's practice. Find the breadths of the system. Burn the apertures until men move. Seal what cannot be cleared. The specific hardware changed with time, but the logic carried forward into later doctrine for assaults on cave belts, hardened bunkers, and subterranean complexes. There is also a civic legacy that sits beside the tactical one. The island's runways became a refuge for damaged bombers and a forward step for fighters, a fact that linked a brutal local fight to the wider air campaign. The image of the flag on Mount Suribachi became a public symbol, but the sustaining lesson for soldiers and planners was quieter. Against fortresses of stone victory belongs to units that make engineering cycles their main effort, and that carry fire under armor to where the enemy breathes.